Greetings fellow gamers, I'm the Soulsborne Seeker and today I'll be reviewing Mark of the Deep, a pirate-themed isometric Metroidvania Soulslike hybrid game developed by Mad Mimic and released on the 24th of January 2025 for PC. The game thrusts you into the role of Marcus, also known as Rookie, a young pirate whose ship gets inexplicably destroyed in the middle of the ocean during an intense thunderstorm just as a massive island emerges from the dark depths. You awaken inside an old ruin and quickly realize you're stuck on the mysterious isle with no means of escape and a legion of twisted creatures on your trail. The more you explore, the more you come to the realization that a dark force is infecting your surroundings, turning everything it touches into grotesque abominations. With what remains of your crew scattered across the island, you go on a journey to save your mates and escape this inhospitable place before the affliction claims them all, in the process learning more about the isle's tormented past. The story is mainly conveyed via dialogue and inscriptions found on stone tablets, as well as a couple of well-made cutscenes. I'll admit I found the narrative to be quite predictable, though I still thoroughly enjoyed it since the lore is very detailed and engaging, and most of the main characters you get to converse with feel unique, each one standing out in terms of visual design and personality in a way that made every conversation distinct and charming in a quaint way. When it comes to setting, the cryptic island you'll get to traverse is home to a decent number of biomes, from the hostile abyssal woods to the once opulent royal gardens all the way to numerous ruins of yore. That being said, while there were a few truly visually distinct places to see, most of the areas I got to move around felt quite similar, definitely in terms of map layout, but at times also visually, which holds especially true when it comes to the aforementioned ruins, which didn't really feature a lot of distinction in between them. To be honest, that didn't really bother me that much, but it did feel like a missed opportunity at times, especially given how much I loved the game's presentation, with its graphics and color palette doing an excellent job of breathing life to your surroundings, and the art also shining in terms of the character portraits you got to see during your discussions with the various inhabitants of the island. In terms of exploration, while I did like the overall sense of discovery infused in Mark of the Deep, there were certain aspects of it that kept me from fully enjoying it. In general, the game's collectibles are divided into health and spirit point upgrades, trinkets, trinket slot upgrades, ranged weapons, relics, quest items, health potions, and finally, weapon upgrade materials. Health and spirit point upgrades refer to items called Leviathan blood fragments and soul gem fragments respectively that, when collected in certain numbers, proceed to increase your health and spirit capacity, with the latter being necessary for you to use your ranged weapons, as I'll explain later on. Trinkets are certain accessories you can equip, which offer specific advantages during combat and of which you can have a limited number equipped at all times based on your currently available trinket slots. Both trinkets and trinket slots can be obtained via exploration as well as by purchasing them from various merchants at the cost of gold, the game's currency. Ranged weapons are self-explanatory and refer to 4 different guns you will get to obtain, usually after a boss battle, with said weapons helpful for both combat as well as exploration, since they can be utilized to shoot switches from afar. Relics can be exchanged for gold via a crew member you eventually find. Quest items are necessary for you to complete certain tasks offered by NPCs you converse with, who then provide useful rewards. Health potions can be used at any time to restore a portion of your hit points and can be replenished by resting at shrine-like boulders that also function as save points. Finally, weapon upgrade materials are used to improve the damage of your melee hook as well as that of your ranged weapons, with said process becoming available once you find a blacksmith. Moving around the map to find all of these secrets is made a bit easier by the game's fast travel system, which does unlock a bit obscurely at some point, but essentially involves this shrine spirit which allows you to travel across a certain number of save locations at will. Now, while all of the aforementioned obtainables constitute solid variety for you to occupy yourself with, there are a few things I wish to discuss here that rubbed me the wrong way. First of all, Mark of the Deep lacks any sort of map or way for you to mark collectibles for future reference. Now, while that would have been a minor issue if the game's world was more straightforward and manageable to traverse, in this case the overall isometric multi-layered structure of the island can result in quite confusing situations when trying to remember where you last saw a collectible that you couldn't reach before but now have the ability to do so, which can lead to intense frustration if you're trying to go for 100% completion, since all you will have to rely on is your memory and nothing else as you revisit each biome in hopes of stumbling upon a previously previously encountered secret. On that note, I do wish to mention that while there were certain secret parts of the map where a new ability was necessary to get to a reward, I eventually realized that a lot of the time it wasn't an ability you needed to get to a place that looked unreachable, but rather a geographical understanding of the map's layout, since you simply had to move through an unseen passageway to get to your prize, which I didn't consider an issue but thought I'd mention it to help you a bit with exploration. The second gripe I had here was the fact that the vast majority of trinkets, health and spirit shards, as well as quite a few weapon, potion and trinket slot upgrades were purchasable from merchants instead of being scattered across the map. That's not a huge grievance by any means, but I thought it took quite a bit away from the wonder of exploration. Third, when it came to weapon upgrades, while finding materials for your ranged weapons was on the easier side of things, finding them for your melee weapon was very rare, which was a shame since said weapon is what you will use the most. Just to give you an idea, while I managed to greatly upgrade my guns, my melee hook remained stuck in the middle stages of improvement until the very end, since I was unable to find the specific piece of ore necessary to take it further, even though I had managed to find a lot of the elite materials required to upgrade it even more after that. Speaking of weapons, combat is perhaps the most prominent aspect of Mark of the Deep, and while I did enjoy it quite a bit, this was another element of the game which presented certain issues that added unnecessary frustration to the experience. On a fundamental level, your main mode of attack is in close quarters using your hook, which features a basic 3-hit combo as well as a charged attack that deals massive damage to enemies while also allowing you to reposition yourself. Here, I believe it is important to mention that the existence of said charge attack may give you the illusion that your basic combo lags a bit, which is something I noticed people pointing out as a bug when commenting on the game, but that's just because the button used for your quick combo is the same one that you need to hold down to charge your assault, not really a bug, and I personally stopped noticing that within the first 5 minutes of gameplay. Ranged combat comes in the form of 4 different weapons you will find, such as a basic pistol and a hand cannon, with each armament differing in terms of damage and distance necessary to hit enemies, but with all 4 of them requiring the use of spirit energy to be utilized, a currency that replenishes by hitting enemies and destroying breakable objects. Avoiding enemy attacks comes in the form of a dodge roll that's available from the start. Now, while fighting enemies was definitely fun for the first few hours of my playthrough, things became progressively annoying the more I progressed. First and foremost, enemies become more and more spongy as you advance through the island's biomes, to the point where I grew bored of fighting most of them and started rushing past them unless a clash was absolutely necessary, which leads me to my second issue. Mark of the Deep features instances of caged combat, where you are locked in a room while having to fight against a few waves of enemies before you're allowed to move forward. Now, as I have mentioned in past reviews, this is something that I do find enjoyable since it can offer some variety in your encounters. That being said, Mark of the Deep overuses this trope to a large extent, throwing a large number of cage fights at you, which, when combined with the damage spongy nature of enemies later on, becomes an exercise in endurance and frustration. It also doesn't help that, at times, the game can throw a ridiculous amount of enemy attacks at you to the point where all you can do is dodge roll for dear life and hope nothing hits you, which is a good way to seg into my final issue here, and that's dodging. When it comes to the dodge rolls, I felt they were inconsistent throughout my experience, with me sometimes dodging an attack in one fight only to be hit by that same attack when trying to dodge it the same way again. It also didn't help that enemy attacks felt very much magnetic, with some of them just making unnatural turns mid-assault as if drawn to you, which really trivialized the point of dodging since it introduced an element of randomness that doesn't belong in this kind of combat system. Boss-wise, this was definitely the part where you felt the Souls-like mentality of the game to your very bones. I'll start by saying that I very much enjoyed the challenge presented by the game's big bads to a large extent, with any grievances I have in this regard being connected to the aforementioned dodge randomness and magnetic enemy attacks. That being said, I did eventually notice that the majority of bosses present here kind of seemed like reskins of one another, with only a few of them feeling truly unique. For example, almost all bosses featured the standard combo attack that gradually moved from one hit all the way to 3 or 4, which was performed in very similar animations. To be fair, each one featured his or her own set of special attacks that kept things fresh, but I still couldn't help a sense of redundancy here. Regardless, these fights were appropriately brutal and resulted in a multitude of defeats on my side until I finally managed to beat all of them, so if tough boss battles are what you're looking for, you'll definitely find them here. On to difficulty, I'd situate Mark of the Deep on the very challenging side of things. Bosses Bosses aside, many of which, depending on your skill, are going to torment you quite a bit before you manage to beat them, the aforementioned cage fights did raise the difficulty a lot, though in a way that kind of felt cheap and slightly obnoxious. In general, you do need to be ready to perish a lot if you give this a shot, so make of that what you will. I personally do enjoy hard games, so for me it mostly worked. But if you're looking for a casual playthrough, this is not it. In terms of length, it took me about 18 hours to finish the game with what I estimate to be about 88% completion rate, with an estimated additional 3 to 5 hours for 100%, depending on how good your memory is when it comes to locations of collectibles, given that the game doesn't offer any assistance in that regard. For a price of about $30, Mark of the Deep does offer value in terms of length, but whether it's worth it to you will depend on how you feel about the issues I mentioned. In conclusion, Mark of the Deep both entertained and frustrated me, with the scale leaning more toward enjoyment. I liked its story and lore, I adored its visual presentation, I loved its diverse cast of characters, I appreciated the decent number of collectibles present, I had fun with combat for the most part, and I found bosses to be a worthwhile challenge. The absence of a map did make my life difficult when trying for 100% completion, to the point where I decided my time would be better utilized elsewhere. Bosses did have many similarities between them. Most enemies eventually became quite spongy for my tastes, and there was an overabundance of cage fights that truly broke momentum, but I still enjoyed most of my playthrough regardless of these issues. You can tell that Mark of the Deep is a labor of love, and this shows when you play it, but certain design choices do bog it down from reaching its full potential by introducing unnecessary tedium to what is otherwise an entertaining swashbuckling adventure. My final verdict on Mark of the Deep is 6.9 out of 10. What did you think about Mark of the Deep? Have you played it yet? Do you agree with the points I mentioned, or do you see things differently? Let me know in the comments below, and please subscribe if you enjoyed this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, Soulsborne Seeker out!